Some people spend their whole lives searching for proof that kindness still exists. Sometimes, it is walking alone through a snowstorm. Thick snow drifted across the empty county road, swallowing tire tracks almost as quickly as they appeared and turning the late afternoon into a world painted entirely in white. The wind whistled through bare maple trees while freezing air settled against every exposed surface. Claire Bennett tightened the faded blue scarf around her neck and kept moving forward one careful step at a time. Her boots were old, their soles worn smooth after years of hard work, but stopping was never an option. Beside her, 6-year-old Lily skipped carefully through the fresh snow, her tiny mitten wrapped around a bright red leash attached to a beautiful golden retriever whose golden coat shimmered beneath a layer of delicate snowflakes. Every few steps the dog looked behind him, ears raised, searching the endless white landscape as though hoping his family might suddenly appear. Claire noticed the worried look in his gentle brown eyes and smiled softly despite the cold stinging her cheeks. "We are getting closer," she whispered. "I promise." Nearly 2 miles earlier, she and Lily had discovered the frightened dog wandering alone near the edge of a frozen creek. Cars had passed without slowing, each driver eager to escape the worsening storm before darkness arrived. Claire had knelt beside the shivering animal and carefully checked the silver tag hanging from his expensive leather collar. Instead of a phone number, it displayed only an address several miles away. She looked toward the nearest bus stop, then toward the long road leading to the unfamiliar neighborhood. Her grocery money was barely enough for dinner. The weather forecast warned that conditions would become dangerous before sunset, and tomorrow she had to be at the neighborhood diner before dawn. None of those thoughts lasted more than a few seconds. Someone, somewhere, was probably terrified that a beloved companion had disappeared into the storm. That alone made the decision easy. Lily never questioned her mother. She simply smiled and reached for the leash. "He must be scared," she said. Claire nodded. "Then we should help him feel less alone." The little girl grinned and gently scratched behind the dog's ears. "You can borrow my courage until we get you home." The golden retriever wagged his tail for the first time since they had found him, and the simple movement filled the silent road with unexpected warmth. As they continued walking, the neighborhood slowly changed. Small apartment buildings gave way to larger homes, then quiet streets lined with towering pine trees whose branches carried heavy blankets of snow. Decorative lanterns glowed beside elegant stone entrances, casting golden reflections across untouched driveways. Lily looked around with wide eyes. "Do people really live in houses this big?" Claire laughed quietly. "Some do." Lily thought for a moment before asking, "Do they ever lose things they love?" Claire looked down at the dog walking faithfully beside them. "Money does not stop people from worrying," she answered gently. "Love makes everyone afraid of losing someone." Just as they reached the final address engraved on the silver tag, distant headlights pierced through the falling snow. One vehicle became 3, then 4 sleek black sport utility vehicles moving carefully along the icy road. They stopped at the entrance of the large estate, and before the engines had fully settled into silence, the front door of the lead vehicle opened. A tall man stepped into the storm wearing a charcoal wool coat, his face carrying the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had spent hours searching without hope. The moment the golden retriever saw him, the dog barked joyfully and sprinted through the snow, leaving a trail of fresh paw prints behind. Claire watched quietly as the man dropped to one knee and embraced his beloved companion, never imagining that this ordinary act of kindness was about to change 2 lives forever. The golden retriever pressed happily against the tall man's coat, his tail sweeping through the fresh snow with joyful energy, while several members of the security team exchanged relieved smiles. The man rested one hand gently on the dog's neck before lifting his eyes toward Claire and Lily. Gratitude softened the exhaustion that had been written across his face only moments earlier. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You have no idea how much this means." Claire simply smiled, brushing a few snowflakes from Lily's knit hat. He knew where he belonged. "We only helped him finish the trip." The man stood and extended his hand. "My name is Ethan Walker." Claire accepted the handshake politely, but without hesitation or curiosity. "Claire Bennett. This is my daughter, Lily." Lily waved shyly before kneeling to hug the golden retriever one last time. "Goodbye, Max. I told you that we would get you home." Ethan looked at the little girl with genuine surprise. You spent all this time walking him here. Claire nodded. The address was on his tag. Ethan glanced toward the long road disappearing into the curtain of snow. His brow tightened. You walked all the way from town. About 2 miles, Claire answered calmly. The sidewalks were easier than waiting for a bus in this weather. Ethan looked down at Claire's boots, noticing the thin leather darkened by melting snow. He noticed Lily's small mittens dusted with ice crystals and the grocery bag Claire still carried in one hand. The wind grew stronger, carrying another wave of snow across the driveway. One of the security guards quietly mentioned that the forecast predicted rapidly worsening conditions before nightfall. Ethan made his decision without another thought. Please let me drive you home. Claire thanked him with a warm smile that carried neither embarrassment nor expectation. That is very kind of you. Ethan gestured toward the waiting sport utility vehicle where warm lights glowed through the windows. It is freezing outside. It would only take a few minutes. Claire looked toward Lily, gently adjusting her scarf before meeting Ethan's eyes again. Her voice remained calm, respectful, and unwavering. We will walk. For a brief moment, even the wind seemed quieter. Ethan blinked, convinced he had misunderstood. Most people recognized his name immediately. Many would have accepted the offer before he finished speaking. Yet Claire's answer carried no pride, no resentment, and no hidden message. It sounded as natural as breathing. Are you certain? He asked softly. Claire nodded. You already thanked us. Max is home. That is enough. Lily reached for her mother's hand, completely unsurprised by the answer. Ethan hesitated before asking one final question. May I at least have someone follow behind to make sure you arrive safely? Claire appreciated the concern, but she gently shook her head once more. Someone else may need your help tonight more than we do. She smiled again, the same quiet smile that had remained unchanged from the moment she arrived at the gate. Have a wonderful evening, Mr. Walker. Before Ethan could think of another reason to persuade her, Claire and Lily turned back toward the snowy road. Their footprints stretched into the white distance, side by side, growing smaller with every step until they blended into the endless winter landscape. Lily looked up at her mother after several minutes of silent walking. Was he important? Claire squeezed her little hand gently. He was worried about someone he loved. That made him just like everyone else. Behind them, Ethan remained standing beside the driveway long after the black vehicles should have departed. Max sat quietly at his side, watching the two figures disappear into the storm. Ethan had built companies worth billions of dollars, negotiated impossible deals, and solved problems that seemed beyond anyone else. Yet he found himself unable to understand one simple sentence spoken by a woman whose coat was worn, whose boots were soaked, and whose dignity seemed richer than anything money had ever placed within his reach. The snow continued to fall, but the image of Claire Bennett walking away refused to disappear. Claire and Lily disappeared behind the curtain of falling snow until the quiet road seemed to erase every trace of their footsteps. But Ethan Walker remained standing beside the entrance of the estate long after the gates had closed behind his security team. Max leaned gently against his leg, completely content now that he was home. Yet Ethan found himself staring toward the empty road as though he expected the two figures to reappear. During countless years in business, he had learned that nearly everything had a price, a negotiation, or an explanation. People accepted favors because they expected opportunities. They accepted generosity because they hoped it would open another door. Claire Bennett had accepted nothing except the satisfaction of returning a beloved dog to his family. The drive back to the main house lasted less than a minute, but Ethan barely noticed the heated leather seat or the quiet conversation coming through his assistant's phone. His mind replayed a single sentence again and again. We will walk. It was spoken without anger, without pride, and without judgment. It was simply the truth she had chosen. Inside the mansion, warm lights reflected across polished hardwood floors while a roaring fireplace filled the great room with comforting heat. Staff members welcomed Max home with visible relief, and the house slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Ethan removed his winter coat, but did not sit down. Instead, he walked toward the large windows overlooking the snow-covered driveway. Somewhere beyond the trees, Claire and Lily were still making their way home through the storm. He wondered whether they had enough food waiting in their kitchen. He wondered if Lily owned another pair of dry gloves. Most of all, he wondered why those questions suddenly mattered so much. The following morning began exactly as every weekday usually did. Before sunrise, Ethan entered the towering headquarters of Walker Capital, where glass walls reflected the first light of dawn across the downtown skyline. Executives waited with reports. Investors filled the conference calendar. Assistants carried tablets loaded with schedules planned down to the minute. Ethan moved from one meeting to another with practiced confidence, discussing acquisitions, construction projects, charitable foundations, and quarterly forecasts. Every decision affected thousands of employees, yet his concentration drifted in unexpected moments. While reviewing a proposal worth millions of dollars, he caught himself remembering the worn blue scarf wrapped around Claire's neck. During a presentation about luxury residential developments, he pictured Lily smiling as she promised a frightened dog that he could borrow her courage. Even Max seemed different that evening. The golden retriever refused to leave Ethan's side, occasionally resting his head against Ethan's knee exactly as he had done after returning home. Ethan reached down absent-mindedly to stroke the dog's fur before quietly asking, what was so different about her? Max answered only by lifting his eyes with the same calm trust that Claire had shown on the snowy road. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and opened the security report from the previous evening. It listed the time Max had been found, the weather conditions, and the names of everyone present at the estate entrance. Near the bottom appeared one simple line entered by a security officer. The dog was safely returned by Claire Bennett and her daughter, Lily Bennett. Ethan looked at those names for a long moment before closing the file. They should have become nothing more than a forgotten detail in another busy week. Yet instead they lingered quietly in his thoughts, like footprints that refused to disappear even after the snow had fallen long enough to cover everything else. Long before the city switched on its office lights, Claire Bennett was already awake. The small apartment remained quiet except for the gentle hum of the old refrigerator and the steady sound of snow melting from the roof outside. She moved carefully through the tiny kitchen so she would not wake Lily too soon. A pot of oatmeal simmered on the stove while she packed a simple lunch into a reusable paper bag. Every movement was familiar because she had repeated the same routine for years, finding comfort in consistency even when life offered very little certainty. When the morning sunlight finally slipped through the frosted window, Lily appeared with sleepy eyes and a bright smile that somehow made the modest apartment feel warmer than the expensive houses Claire had walked past only days before. They shared breakfast together, laughed about how Max had almost refused to leave Lily's side, and then stepped outside into another cold morning where neighbors greeted Claire by name. She smiled at everyone because kindness had never depended on convenience. After walking Lily to school, Claire hurried to the neighborhood diner where she worked the breakfast shift. She welcomed every customer with the same genuine warmth whether they ordered coffee alone or a full family breakfast. Elderly regulars often waited for her section because she remembered how they liked their eggs, asked about their grandchildren, and listened without looking at the clock. When one older customer quietly admitted he had forgotten his wallet, Claire simply told the cashier to add the meal to her own bill. She never mentioned it again. By early afternoon, she had changed into another jacket and crossed town to spend several hours helping at the local community center. The position was temporary and paid very little, but she enjoyed organizing donated clothing, preparing after-school activities, and making certain every child felt noticed. Whenever a new family arrived looking uncertain or embarrassed to ask for assistance, Claire greeted them with the same gentle expression she wished someone had once offered her. She never allowed anyone to feel ashamed for needing help. Later, after picking Lily up from school, they stopped at a neighborhood grocery store. Claire compared prices carefully before choosing only what they truly needed. While waiting in line, she noticed a young mother searching every pocket of her purse with growing panic after realizing she did not have enough money to buy baby formula. Without hesitation, Claire quietly placed the missing amount on the counter before the woman could apologize. "Please take care of your little one," she said softly. "That is all that matters today." The grateful mother tried to ask for her name, but Claire only smiled and gently wished her well. Lily looked up at her as they carried their groceries home through the chilly afternoon. "Why do you always help people?" she asked. Claire thought for a moment before answering. "Because everyone is carrying something that other people cannot see." Lily nodded as though the answer made perfect sense. "Then maybe someone will help them carry it for a little while." Claire smiled proudly. That is exactly how a community becomes stronger. Across the city, Ethan Walker finished another board meeting surrounded by polished conference tables, financial projections, and conversations about growth. The meeting had been successful, yet as he looked out from the top floor toward the neighborhoods stretching far below, he found himself wondering where Claire Bennett was spending her ordinary day. He still knew almost nothing about her, but somehow he was beginning to understand that the quiet strength he had witnessed in the snow had not been created by a single moment. It had been built one small act of kindness at a time, long before she ever walked 2 miles to bring Max safely home. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the city, but Ethan Walker discovered that some memories refused to fade with the snow. Nearly every evening, after another full day of meetings, contracts, and decisions that shaped the future of Walker Capital, he found himself thinking about Claire Bennett and the quiet certainty she carried through the storm. He never spoke about her to anyone. There was no logical reason to explain why a woman he had met for only a few minutes continued to occupy his thoughts. Yet something about her calm refusal had unsettled an assumption he had carried for years, the belief that generosity always flowed from those who possessed the most. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan visited one of Walker Capital's community grant recipients, a neighborhood education center that the company had quietly supported for several years. The visit had been scheduled months earlier, and he expected nothing more than a brief tour before returning downtown. Instead, while speaking with the director, he noticed a familiar blue scarf hanging from a coat rack near the entrance. Before he could ask about it, children's laughter echoed down the hallway. Claire stepped into view carrying a box filled with donated books, while several elementary school students followed behind her with bright smiles. She had not noticed Ethan. Her attention remained on helping the children arrange the books across low wooden shelves. One little boy struggled to reach the highest shelf, and Claire knelt beside him, encouraging him until he proudly placed the final book himself. The director smiled as she watched. Claire has a way of making every child believe they can do something important. Ethan listened quietly. Does she work here full-time? The director gently shook her head. No, she helps whenever she finishes her other jobs. Sometimes she comes on her days off. Sometimes she stays late after everyone else leaves. She never asks for recognition. Ethan watched from across the room as Claire patiently repaired a torn page in one of the donated storybooks instead of throwing it away. A little girl wrapped her arms around Claire without warning, and Claire returned the hug with the same warmth she had shown Max on the snowy road. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No audience applauded. No cameras recorded it. Yet Ethan realized he was witnessing the same quiet kindness that had carried a frightened dog safely home through a blizzard. As the visit continued, volunteers casually shared more stories without realizing Ethan had any connection to Claire. One elderly volunteer explained that Claire often organized food drives for struggling families. Another mentioned that she quietly delivered groceries to neighbors recovering from illness. Someone else remembered that Claire regularly stayed after community events to clean the rooms long after everyone had gone home. Each story sounded ordinary by itself, but together they painted a picture of someone whose kindness had become a habit rather than an exception. Ethan never interrupted. He simply listened. Before leaving, he glanced toward the hallway once more. Claire was helping Lily color a handmade thank you card while laughing at something the little girl had said. For the first time in many years, Ethan understood that true character was not revealed during extraordinary moments. It was built through countless ordinary choices made when nobody expected anything in return. As he stepped back into the cool afternoon air, one quiet thought settled firmly in his mind. Returning Max had not been the remarkable part of Claire Bennett's story. It had simply been the first chapter he was fortunate enough to witness. The following Monday began with an ordinary conversation that quietly changed the direction of 2 lives. Ethan Walker arrived at Walker Capital before sunrise as he always did, but instead of heading directly into the executive conference room, he stopped outside the office of Sarah Collins, the director responsible for the company's community outreach division. I would like to review the applicants for the Community Outreach Program Coordinator position, he said. Sarah looked mildly surprised because Ethan rarely involved himself in individual hiring decisions below the executive level. Of course, she replied. We have already completed the first screening, but I can bring the remaining files. A few minutes later, a neat stack of resumes rested on the conference table. Ethan opened the first folder with no expectation of finding anyone in particular. He reminded himself that if Claire Bennett had ever applied, she deserved exactly the same fair consideration as every other candidate. He would not create a position for her, and he would not ask anyone to ignore the established process. Opportunity only had value when it respected merit. As he carefully reviewed the applications, one familiar name appeared several folders into the stack. Claire Bennett. Ethan paused for a moment before reading every page from beginning to end. Her resume was modest compared to some applicants. There were no prestigious universities or impressive corporate titles. Instead, there were years of steady work, experience organizing neighborhood programs, volunteer leadership at community centers, fundraising events for local families, and letters of recommendation filled with remarkably similar descriptions. Dependable, compassionate, organized, trusted. One letter from the director of the education center caught Ethan's attention. It explained that Claire consistently solved problems before anyone noticed them, encouraged volunteers without seeking attention, and treated every family with equal dignity regardless of their circumstances. Ethan quietly placed the letter back into the folder without saying a word. Sarah glanced across the table. She scored well during the initial review, she explained. Strong community experience. Excellent references. We plan to invite her to the interview stage later this week. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. Please continue exactly as planned. Sarah smiled politely. No special instructions? Ethan closed the folder carefully. Only one. Make certain every candidate receives the same opportunity to demonstrate what they can contribute. The position should belong to the best person, nothing more and nothing less. Sarah agreed immediately because that had always been the department's policy. After she left the room, Ethan looked once more at Claire's application before returning it to the stack. He felt a quiet sense of relief knowing she had never asked for help, never mentioned looking for work, and never expected anything because she had returned Max safely. She had simply applied through the same process as everyone else, trusting that her experience would speak for itself. Meanwhile, across town, Claire finished another morning at the diner before walking to the community center, completely unaware that her application had reached the interview stage. She spent the afternoon organizing donated winter coats for families preparing for another cold front expected later that week. Lily sat nearby coloring pictures while chatting happily with several younger children. Claire smiled as she watched them share crayons without anyone asking. Moments like that reminded her why she believed kindness always multiplied when someone chose to practice it first. She had no idea that somewhere across the city, her resume had quietly reminded one of the busiest men in America that character could never be measured by titles alone. And for the first time in many years, Ethan found himself looking forward to an upcoming interview not because he hoped to hire an employee, but because he wanted to see whether the remarkable woman he had met in the snow was exactly the same person every ordinary day. 3 days before the scheduled interviews, another winter storm arrived without much warning. The morning sky had been gray since sunrise, and by late afternoon thick snowflakes drifted steadily across the city, covering sidewalks, rooftops, and parked cars in a fresh blanket of white. Claire Bennett glanced through the front window of the community center as volunteers hurried to finish before the weather became worse. She checked the clock and smiled softly. It was almost time to pick up Lily from her after-school program. She gathered her worn blue scarf, buttoned her winter coat, thanked the remaining volunteers, and stepped outside into the cold. The wind carried snow across the streets with surprising force, but Claire had learned long ago that life rarely waited for perfect weather. 20 minutes later, she found Lily standing beneath the entrance canopy, happily waving the colorful drawing she had made that afternoon. Mother and daughter started their familiar walk home together, talking about school projects, favorite books, and the interview Claire hoped would give them a chance at a more stable future. Lily looked up with bright eyes. Do you think they will like you? Claire smiled gently. I hope they will see who I am. That is all anyone can ask. They had only walked another block when a black sport utility vehicle slowed beside the snowy sidewalk. Claire immediately recognized the vehicle, and a moment later the rear passenger door opened. Ethan Walker stepped out, buttoning his charcoal overcoat against the wind. For a brief second, all three simply looked at one another, surprised by the unexpected meeting. Max sat comfortably inside the vehicle, his tail already thumping happily against the seat the moment he recognized Claire and Lily through the window. Lily laughed with delight. "Max remembers us." Ethan smiled, genuinely pleased to see them again. "He has never forgotten either of you." Max eagerly bounded into the snow as soon as the driver opened the door, greeting Lily with joyful excitement before gently nudging Claire's hand exactly as he had on the day they found him. Ethan watched the simple reunion before looking toward the darkening sky. Snow continued to fall more heavily than before, and visibility along the road had already begun to decrease. "Please," he said with quiet sincerity, "allow me to take you home today." Claire hesitated for only a moment before looking down at Lily, whose cheeks had already turned rosy from the cold. She wrapped Lily's scarf a little tighter and realized the temperature would continue dropping before they reached their apartment. This time her decision was different. She looked back at Ethan with the same calm expression he remembered so clearly. "For Lily's sake," she answered softly, "I will accept." "Thank you." Ethan nodded with a warm smile that carried relief rather than victory. "That is all I hoped to hear." Inside the comfortably heated vehicle, Max rested happily between Lily and Claire while snow tapped gently against the windows. No one spoke for the first few minutes. The silence felt surprisingly natural. Finally, Ethan glanced toward Claire. "I learned that you applied for a position at Walker Capital." Claire looked genuinely surprised. "I did not know you were connected to that department." Ethan smiled modestly. "I am connected to every department, although I rarely become involved in interviews." Claire gave a quiet laugh. "Then I hope they judge me fairly." Ethan met her eyes with complete honesty. "They will. I made certain of that. Your application reached the interview stage because of your qualifications, not because we met in the snow." Claire thanked him with a grateful nod. As the vehicle continued through the peaceful winter streets, Ethan realized something had changed since their first meeting. The distance between them was no longer measured by miles of snow, but by mutual respect quietly earned through simple acts of honesty, kindness, and dignity. The morning of the interview arrived beneath a bright winter sky that seemed almost impossible after so many days of snow. Sunlight reflected across the glass towers of downtown, while Claire Bennett stood quietly outside Walker Capital headquarters, taking one slow breath before stepping through the revolving doors. She wore the same navy coat she had carefully cleaned the night before and carried a neatly organized folder containing extra copies of her resume, letters of recommendation, and notes she had prepared after Lily had fallen asleep. She had practiced every answer she could imagine, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she respected the opportunity she had been given. Inside the spacious lobby, polished marble floors reflected the morning light, while employees greeted visitors with warm professionalism. Claire checked in at the reception desk and was escorted to a comfortable waiting area where several other candidates quietly reviewed their notes. She smiled politely to each of them, wishing them good luck without seeing them as competitors. To Claire, everyone sitting in that room had a story worth respecting. Upstairs, Ethan Walker watched the beginning of the interview process from a conference room overlooking the city. He had intentionally removed himself from the hiring panel because he wanted the process to remain fair. Sarah Collins and two senior managers would conduct every interview using the same questions, the same evaluation standards, and the same scoring system. Ethan had made only one request. Every candidate deserved to be seen beyond a list of qualifications. When Claire's name was called, she entered the conference room with quiet confidence. Sarah welcomed her warmly before beginning the interview. They discussed her years at the community center, her experience organizing volunteers, and the challenges of supporting families with limited resources. Claire answered every question honestly, never exaggerating her accomplishments or minimizing the contributions of others. When asked to describe effective leadership, she paused thoughtfully before speaking. Leadership begins with listening. People usually tell you what they need if they believe you truly care enough to hear them. One interviewer asked how she would respond if funding became limited during an important community program. Claire smiled gently. Resources matter, but trust matters even more. Communities become stronger when people believe they are building something together instead of waiting for someone else to solve every problem. Sarah quietly wrote several notes while the other managers exchanged approving glances. Claire spoke with calm conviction, not because she had memorized perfect answers, but because every response reflected experiences she had already lived. When the formal interview concluded, Sarah thanked her for coming and assured her that every candidate would be contacted after the evaluation process had been completed. Claire thanked each interviewer individually before leaving the room with the same quiet grace she had shown from the very beginning. As she walked through the lobby toward the exit, Ethan happened to be crossing the reception area after finishing another meeting. Their eyes met naturally, and both stopped for a moment. Ethan smiled first. "How did it go?" Claire returned the smile. "I gave them my best. The rest is no longer mine to decide." Ethan nodded with genuine admiration. "That answer tells me everything I hoped was true." Claire looked at him with gentle curiosity. Ethan continued before she could misunderstand his meaning. "The day you returned, Max, I thought you had reminded me what kindness looked like. Since then I have learned something even more important. Kindness is not a single decision for you. It is simply the way you choose to live." Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering softly. "I only try to leave people a little better than I found them." Ethan smiled as she stepped toward the doors. "No matter what happens next, I believe you already have." Claire thanked him sincerely before walking back into the crisp winter afternoon, carrying no certainty about the outcome, yet feeling completely at peace because she knew that true success had never depended on impressing the right person. It had always depended on remaining faithful to the person she had worked so hard to become. 5 days later, Claire Bennett received a phone call just as she finished arranging donated food boxes at the community center. She stepped into the quiet hallway to answer, expecting nothing more than another schedule change from the diner. Instead, Sarah Collins introduced herself and thanked Claire once again for attending the interview. Claire listened quietly, her heart beating a little faster with every passing second. Then Sarah smiled through the phone. "I am very pleased to offer you the position of Community Outreach Program Coordinator at Walker Capital." Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, overcome not by excitement alone, but by gratitude. "Thank you," she answered softly. "I promise I will do everything I can to deserve your confidence." When the call ended, she remained standing in silence before walking back into the activity room where Lily was helping younger children stack books onto a shelf. Claire knelt beside her daughter with tears shining gently in her eyes. "We have some wonderful news." Lily searched her mother's face before breaking into a huge smile. "You got the job." Claire laughed happily. "Yes, I did." Lily wrapped both arms around her mother without saying another word. Sometimes joy did not need a speech. It only needed someone to share it with. During her first weeks at Walker Capital, Claire approached every responsibility with the same humility she had carried throughout her life. She visited neighborhood organizations, listened carefully to community leaders, learned the names of volunteers, and made certain every family seeking assistance was treated with dignity. Instead of creating complicated programs that looked impressive on paper, she focused on practical solutions that helped real people. Ethan watched the results quietly from a respectful distance. Reports showed stronger volunteer participation, better relationships with local organizations, and growing trust between Walker Capital and the communities it served. Yet the numbers were never what impressed him most. Employees often returned from community events talking about how Claire remembered every child's name, thanked every volunteer personally, and stayed until the last chair had been folded away. She led exactly as she had described during her interview. She listened first. Early one Saturday afternoon, Walker Capital hosted a neighborhood winter celebration at the same community center where Ethan had first seen Claire helping children organize books. Families filled the building with laughter while volunteers served warm soup, distributed winter clothing, and prepared activities for local children. Claire moved from one table to another with calm confidence, greeting every guest as though they had been friends for years. Ethan arrived quietly with Max walking happily beside him. The moment Lily spotted the familiar golden retriever, she ran forward with delighted laughter while Max eagerly met her halfway across the room, his tail wagging with the same joyful excitement he had shown on the snowy night that had first connected their lives. Ethan stood beside Claire for a moment, watching children laugh as snowflakes drifted gently beyond the windows. "You earned every bit of this," he said sincerely. Claire smiled without taking her eyes off the families enjoying the afternoon together. "We all earned it." Communities become stronger when people choose to help one another. Ethan nodded slowly because he finally understood the lesson that had begun on a quiet road covered in snow. Wealth could build buildings, fund programs, and create opportunities, but it could never replace compassion that had to come from the human heart. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the melting snow outside, Claire watched Lily laughing with Max while neighbors, volunteers, and co-workers shared simple moments of kindness together. The road that had once seemed cold and lonely had quietly led them all to something far more valuable than success alone. Sometimes the greatest gift a person can return is not a lost dog, but another person's faith that goodness still exists in the world.